the forgotten fortune. In the year 1790, a man named Samuel Hopkins walked away with a single piece of paper signed by George Washington himself. It was the very first patent ever granted in the United States of America, patent number 1, the founding document of American invention, and it was not for a steam engine, not for a weapon, not for some clever machine. It was for a better way to make one humble thing, potash, ash, the gray powder left in the bottom of a fire. Think about what that means. Of all the things a brand new nation could have chosen to protect first, before anything else, it chose a better method for refining wood ash, because ash was that valuable, that central to the economy, that worth fighting over. And then somewhere across the next 200 years, we forgot all of it. We stopped saving it, stopped trading it, stopped respecting it, and started sweeping it straight into the trash can by the back door. Today, I want to hand that forgotten fortune back to you, because the full story of this ash, from Washington's signature to your fireplace, explains exactly what it can do for your garden. And, just as importantly, exactly what it can never do, no matter what the title promised you. You've got a bucket of cold gray wood ash sitting by the stove or the fire pit, and the internet is telling you to ferment it, pour it on your garden, and watch your plants grow crazy fast. And I am going to show you how to make it and how to use it the real way. But first, I have to tell you something the hype videos will never tell you, because it doesn't fit on a thumbnail. This new trick is not new at all. It is one of the oldest and most valuable substances in all of human history, a thing nations traded, taxed, and fought over. And once you know its real story, the whole picture snaps into focus. You'll understand precisely why it works. And you'll understand, just as clearly, why it will never ever make your plants grow crazy fast, no matter how many capital letters the title uses. And I'm going to be straight with you the whole way, the way this channel always is. I'll tell you what this ancient stuff genuinely does, where the modern hype oversells it, and the one warning the old-timers respected that can still wreck your garden today. By the end, you'll understand this bucket better than the person who made the crazy fast thumbnail, because you'll know its whole story instead of just its sales pitch. Here's the one idea to carry the whole way through. Wood ash isn't a modern miracle. It's an ancient fortune we forgot how to read, and reading it right is the whole trick. What a tree actually is. To understand the ash, you have to understand the tree it came from. Think about what a tree really is. For 40, 60, 100 years, that tree stood in one spot and did one job with astonishing patience. It mined the earth. Its roots drove down deep, far below where your vegetable roots will ever reach, past the topsoil, into the clay and the broken rock. And it pulled up minerals, calcium, potassium, magnesium, and a whole alphabet of trace elements, and locked them into its wood, year after year after year. So a log isn't just fuel, it's a century of concentrated mineral wealth, mined slowly and patiently from deep in the ground by the one organism on your property, patient enough to spend a lifetime doing it. Your shallow-rooted vegetables could never reach those deep minerals on their own. But the tree did. And then you cut it down and stacked it by the stove. And when you burn that log, something very specific happens. And it is the single key to this entire subject. So hold it tight. The fire consumes the carbon and sends it roaring up the chimney as heat and smoke. The nitrogen goes with it. Nitrogen burns and escapes as gas straight up the flue, gone. But the minerals, the calcium, the potassium, the magnesium, and the trace elements cannot burn. Fire has no power over them. They have nowhere to go, so they simply stay behind in the firebox as that fine gray powder. That means your bucket of ash is the distilled mineral skeleton of a 100-year-old tree. Its century of deep mining, reduced down to a few pounds of dust, you can hold in two hands. It is genuinely concentrated wealth. It's just wealth of one very specific kind, the mineral kind, with the nitrogen burned away, and that one specific fact is the thing that explains absolutely everything that follows, including the lie sitting right there in the title. So if a bucket of ash is the mineral fortune of a whole tree, why on earth did people once patent it, trade it, and build economies on it, and then throw it away? The answer to that is the most useful history lesson a gardener can learn. A log is a century of mining. The fire just hands you the treasure, white coal, when ash ran the economy. Here's the history almost nobody tells you, and it will change how you look at that bucket forever, for centuries. Wood ash was one of the single most valuable commodities on the entire planet. They had a name for the concentrated, refined version, potash. And the beautiful thing is that the name itself is the recipe, pot ash, because you made it by soaking wood ashes in a pot of water, then boiling that liquid down until you were left with a hard, potent powder. The word is literally a set of instructions for how it was made, and it gets better, because that same humble word is where we get potassium. The element itself was first discovered and named by pulling it out of potash. Stop and sit with that for a second. Potassium, the K in every bag of NPK fertilizer, the nutrient your tomatoes crave, the thing the whole modern fertilizer industry sells you in plastic sacks. It is named after a pot of soaked wood ash. The most famous nutrient in your garden carries the name of the trick you are about to throw in the trash. In the 16, 17, and 1800s, potash was white gold, and I mean that almost literally. Settlers clearing the great forests of New England and Canada faced a problem. Endless trees in the way of their fields, and they turned that problem into cash. They didn't just burn the timber to be rid of it. They carefully saved the ash, soaked it in barrels to leach out the good stuff, and boiled the liquid down into hard cakes of potash they could sell. For many a frontier family, that ash money was the first real cash they ever earned from their land, the thing that bought the nails, the glass, the tools to build the farm itself. It was shipped by the barrel and floated by the barge down rivers and across whole oceans, because the world could not get enough of it. Potash made soap, it made glass, it bleached cloth in the mills, it fertilized worn-out fields. By the middle of the 1800s, America was exporting tens of thousands of tons of it every year, and its price was printed in the newspapers right next to wheat and cotton, tracked like any other commodity that moved markets. Entire livelihoods, entire towns, ran on turning forest ash into money. This same gray powder you were about to sweep into the trash once helped build nations, brick by brick and barrel by barrel. And remember, the very first United States patent, signed by George Washington in 1790, went to Samuel Hopkins for an improved way to make potash. Not a plow, not a gun, ash. That is how seriously the world once took the powder in your fireplace. So what happened? Why did white gold become trash? That answer is the exact reason the crazy fast promise is a lie. Because the thing that killed the ash trade is the thing ash was always missing. History doesn't just explain the value, it explains the ceiling. What killed the ash trade and why it matters to your tomatoes? Here's how the fortune collapsed, and it's the most important turn in this whole story. Around the turn of the 20th century, two things happened close together. First, German chemists figured out how to mine vast underground deposits of potassium salts straight out of the earth, in quantities no barrel of leached ash could ever match. And then, around 1910, came the real killer, a chemical process that pulled nitrogen right out of thin air and turned it into cheap, abundant synthetic fertilizer. Overnight, a farmer could buy a bag of uniform, shelf-stable plant food, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, all in guaranteed, measured amounts printed on the label that sat in a warehouse for years without changing, shipped anywhere by the ton, no boiling, no leaching, no skill required. Against that, handmade ash didn't stand a chance. The old potash kettles went cold and rusted in the barns. The ash piles that families had guarded like savings accounts lost their worth. And within just a couple of generations, the powder that had helped build entire economies quietly became the powder people sweep off the hearth and dump in the bin without a second thought. A fortune didn't get stolen, it got outcompeted and then forgotten. But look closely at what replaced it, because this is the whole lesson of the video hiding inside a history lesson. The winning product, the bagged synthetic fertilizer that made ash worthless, had one thing ash never had and never could have: nitrogen. And that, right there, is the exact reason your bucket of ash cannot make plants grow crazy fast, no matter what any title screams. Nitrogen is the nutrient that drives fast, lush, leafy, explosive growth, the green surge everyone means when they say crazy fast, and it is precisely the one nutrient that burns off in the fire and is completely, permanently absent from ash. Read that again. The thing that killed the ash trade is the exact thing ash is missing. Ash was never the whole fertilizer. It was always only the potassium and calcium half of the equation, and everyone in those centuries knew it. That's why the old farmers used ash for its minerals but got their nitrogen from manure, from rotted plants, from the barnyard. They never expected ash alone to make anything shoot up fast, because they understood what it was. It's only modern clickbait, centuries later, that pretends this half of fertilizer is an overnight growth miracle. And here's the beautiful part. History already ran this experiment for 200 years, at the scale of entire nations, and the verdict is in, and it is not close. Ash feeds flowers, fruit, flavor, and strength. It does not, and it cannot, drive fast, leafy growth, because the growth nutrient left the building in the smoke, 100 years before it reached your bucket. So the honest version of the title is this: wood ash is the ancient mineral half of fertility, real, valuable, and worth reclaiming, but it is not, and never was, a crazy fast grow everything miracle. Knowing that is what separates you from every hype video. So now let's take that ancient knowledge and do the modern version of exactly what the old potash makers did. Because the fermenting step isn't new either. It's a gentler echo of a very old process. The old process made gentle what fermenting really is. Here's a detail that ties the whole history straight into your garden this weekend. The old potash makers didn't just walk around sprinkling dry ash on things. They knew from hard experience that raw ash was fierce, caustic, dangerous to handle. So they soaked it in water, in barrels, and leached the good soluble part out into a liquid, separating the useful minerals from the harsh grit. And that soaking is exactly what turned a dangerous dust into something they could work with and sell. That leaching process, water pulling the treasure out of the ash, is the direct ancestor of the trick you clicked on today. What the modern fermented wood ash method adds is a spoon of sugar, and here I have to be honest with you, because the name is misleading. You are not fermenting the ash. Ash is sterile. It came out of a fire and has no living matter left in it to ferment. What ferments is the sugar. Wild microbes eat that sugar and produce mild organic acids, and those acids do something wonderful. They partially neutralize the ash's harsh alkalinity and help dissolve its minerals into gentle, plant-friendly forms. So fermenting is really a clever, sped-up, modern twist on the ancient leaching the potash makers were already doing 300 years ago. You soak the ash to pull the minerals out into water, and you add a spoon of sugar so the acids that form soften the caustic edge that made raw ash so dangerous to handle. The old-timers tamed their ash with water and time, and a lot of hard boiling. You're taming yours with water, sugar, and a week of patience. Easier, gentler, but the same fundamental idea their whole industry ran on. And it is genuinely worth doing, because raw ash is aggressive stuff. Rub a wet slurry of it between your fingers, and it feels slippery, almost soapy. That's the feeling of a strong alkaline base, the same chemical family as lye, and it's the same reason the potash from these ashes was used to make soap in the first place. That fierceness will burn tender roots and shock the life out of soil if you use it raw and undiluted. That's not me fear-mongering. It's exactly why the old-timers measured it so carefully, and it's exactly why university extension offices still print warnings about wood ash to this very day. The danger is old, well-documented, and real. The taming is what makes it safe to use. So the trick genuinely works, and now you understand why, at a level no thumbnail will ever give you. You are extracting the ancient mineral fortune of a tree and taming its ancient fierceness with a spoon of sugar and a week of time, doing in a bucket what an entire industry once did in barrels and kettles. Now let me show you how to actually do it in your own kitchen, and then the honest limits the history has already taught us, because the same story that tells you why ash is valuable also tells you exactly where it will hurt you. The method sounds new and trendy. The wisdom underneath it is 300 years old and was signed by a president. How to make and use it. Here's the method, and it costs nothing but a little patience, fitting, since the old-timers gathered their fortune for free too. Start with clean hardwood ash only, and this first rule is a real safety rule, not a preference. Never use ash from painted, stained, treated, or glued wood, from charcoal briquettes, or from any trash fire. Whatever chemicals and heavy metals were in that material didn't vanish in the flames. They got concentrated into the ash, and you would be pouring them straight into the soil that grows your food. The old potash makers burned clean forest hardwood, and so should you. Sift the ash into a fine powder, leaving the charcoal lumps behind. Then it's 1 cup of sifted ash to 1 gallon of non-chlorinated water. And if your tap water is chlorinated, let it stand out for a day first, because chlorine is designed to kill microbes, and microbes are what you're about to depend on. Stir in a tablespoon of unsulfured molasses or plain raw sugar to feed the ferment. Unsulfured matters because the preservatives in sulfured molasses can smother the microbes you want. Cover the container loosely so gases escape but insects stay out. Tuck it somewhere warm and shaded and give it 7 to 14 days until that sharp chemical smell has softened into something earthy and mildly sour. Your nose, not the calendar, tells you when it's truly ready. If it still smells harsh, the acids haven't finished their work. Then, and this is the discipline the old potash makers understood in their bones because they handled the concentrated stuff, you never use it straight. Even fermented, it's a concentrate and it's still alkaline. Dilute about 1 cup of the finished liquid into a full gallon of plain water for garden beds and half that strength for container plants. Since a pot has too little soil to forgive a mistake, pour it onto soil that is already moist, right around the root zone, never up on the leaves where droplets can scorch in the sun, and never onto dry ground where it gets pulled in too fast and stresses the roots. Apply it every 2 or 3 weeks, but only during the window where it actually earns its keep. And here's that timing, which is really just the history repeating itself in your backyard. Use it as your plants shift from growing leaves to making flowers and fruit, because that is the exact moment they start craving the potassium and calcium that ash is loaded with. Watch for the first flower buds. That's your green light. On a young seedling straining to put out its first leaves, this tea does nothing useful and can even set it back by spiking the pH, because a seedling wants nitrogen and ash has none to give. Right feed, wrong moment, no result. Right feed, right moment, real reward. That timing is the entire game, and the old farmers knew it without ever reading a label. But there's a short list of plants where the history warns you off entirely, because the very property that made ash valuable is the property that makes it dangerous in the wrong place. That warning is centuries old, and it's still true. The ancient warning, who to never give it to. Here's the warning the potash makers and the old farmers all carried, and it's as true today as it was 3 centuries ago. Ash is alkaline. It raises soil pH in exactly the same way garden lime does. In fact, sweetening sour, acidic soil with a dusting of ash is one of its oldest and most legitimate uses, one the old-timers relied on. But that same power is a gift on acidic soil and a curse everywhere else. So never use this tea on acid-loving plants, blueberries, azaleas, rhododendrons, camellias, and their kind. Give a blueberry a drink of ash, and you shove its soil pH up out of the narrow range it needs, which locks up the iron the plant depends on, and you'll watch the leaves yellow between the veins as it slowly starves in soil that's technically full of food it can no longer reach. And keep it well off your potato patch, too. Potatoes can use the potassium, but the rising alkalinity actively invites potato scab, the disease that leaves the skins rough, brown, and corky. The very property that made ash a valuable soil sweetener for centuries is the property that quietly wrecks the wrong plant. Same powder, opposite result, decided entirely by what you pointed at. Then there's a bigger, older rule underneath. Know your soil before you add ash at all. If your ground is already neutral or alkaline, more ash just pushes it further out of range and locks nutrients away, which is the real cause of that "I added ash and my garden went dead" story people tell. University extensions today echo the old caution exactly. Treat ash like lime, use it modestly, test if you can. Fermenting softens the danger, it doesn't erase it. The old-timers measured ash carefully because they'd watched it burn a field. 200 years later, that respect is still the right instinct. Now, one honest word about why you're hearing this trick framed as a secret they don't want you to know, because you will hear that, and it deserves a straight answer. Some versions of this wrap the whole thing in a story that the fertilizer industry deliberately buried it, that it's forbidden knowledge, that stores can't sell it because it's a suppressed miracle. That is not history, that is marketing. And I won't hand it to you, because the real history is right here, and it's simpler and more interesting. Ash didn't lose its value because a villain hid it. It lost its value out in the open, in the market, because cheap synthetic fertilizer that included nitrogen genuinely outcompeted a mineral-only product that had to be leached and boiled by hand. That's not suppression. That's just a better rounded, shelf-stable product winning on convenience. Nobody is hiding your bucket of ash from you. It simply stopped being worth trading the day something more complete and more convenient showed up, and then 2 generations forgot it had ever been worth anything at all. There's no conspiracy in this story. There's only a fortune we all quietly stopped bothering to collect, and the genuinely good news buried in that is this. The moment you decide to, you can start collecting it again, this weekend, for free, from your own fireplace, with no bag to buy, no book, and no link in any description. So let me put the whole story together. The tree, the fortune, the fall, and the method, in one pass you can act on. Because the trick was never new, and it was never a miracle. It was an inheritance. The verdict, recap plus cliffhanger. So here's the whole story, start to finish, from Washington's signature to your fireplace. Wood ash isn't a modern miracle. It's an ancient fortune we simply forgot how to read. A log is a century of minerals mined slowly from deep in the earth by a patient tree. When you burn it, the fire drives off the carbon and the nitrogen and hands you the mineral skeleton that's left behind. For hundreds of years, that skeleton was white gold, potash. The very first thing the United States ever patented, traded by the ton to make soap and glass and to feed worn-out fields, its price printed beside wheat and cotton. And then, around 1910, cheap synthetic fertilizer arrived carrying the one thing ash never had, nitrogen, and made the old powder worthless almost overnight. That missing nitrogen is the entire reason ash can never ever make your plants grow crazy fast. It has no growth throttle in it. What it does have, it gives generously: potassium, calcium, and trace minerals that feed flowers, fruit, flavor, and strength, steadily, over weeks, never as an overnight leafy explosion. The fermenting step is just a modern, sugar-powered echo of the old leaching that always tamed this ash, genuinely useful, and honestly named an extraction, not a fermentation, because the sterile ash can't ferment. The sugar does. So make it from clean hardwood ash, give it its week, dilute it hard, feed your fruiting plants right at flowering, and keep it far away from your blueberries, your azaleas, your potatoes, and any soil that's already sweet. Say the one line back before you pour a drop. Wood ash isn't a modern miracle, it's an ancient fortune, and reading it right is the whole trick. Now do 2 things for me. First, this week, just stop throwing your clean hardwood ash away. That one change costs nothing, and it's where the whole thing begins. Start a single bucket, sift some ash, add the water and the spoon of sugar, cover it, and let it quietly work while you do the other half of the job, which is learning your own soil's pH with a cheap test. Knowing your starting number is exactly what the old farmers did by instinct, and it's the one thing that tells you whether ash even belongs in your garden or would push it too far. Then come down to the comments and tell me 2 things: what your soil pH turned out to be, and what you're planning to feed with this tea, whether it's a row of tomatoes, some peppers, or an old apple tree that could use the potassium. I read them, and I genuinely want to know how many of you are about to reclaim a fortune your great-grandparents would have recognized on sight and never believed you'd forgotten. And then stick around, because next time I'm telling the buried history of the other thing every gardener throws away that used to be treasure, urine, believe it or not, one of the most prized fertilizers in the ancient and medieval world, with a nitrogen story that's the exact opposite of ashes. It sounds like a joke. The history says otherwise. Hit subscribe so it finds you when it drops. Until then, save the bucket, learn your soil, and start collecting the fortune we all forgot was ours.